You're paying $2,000, maybe $4,000 a month to live somewhere you hate. Thin walls, bad neighbors, a parking situation that makes you want to move to the woods. And you call that a housing problem? Let me show you a housing problem. We're counting down 13 real places on Earth where people wake up every single morning, go to work, raise kids, argue with their spouse, in conditions that would make any American pack up and leave within 48 hours. We're talking a village hanging over a 160-foot cliff with nowhere to run. A floating city built specifically so that an invading army couldn't reach them. And the number one spot, a city above the clouds where 50,000 people are slowly poisoning themselves with mercury because the alternative is worse. No dramatization, no CGI. These are real addresses. Let's go. Huacachina, Peru. Number 13 kicks off in a place that would break every algorithm if you posted it without context, because it looks completely, obviously fake. Picture the driest desert on Earth, the Atacama, in southern Peru. We're not talking Arizona dry, we're talking no recorded rainfall for decades in some areas dry. No plants, no animals, no sound except wind carving 300-foot sand dunes into shapes that shift every single day. You could film a Mars landing here and nobody would question it. And then, right in the middle of all that, a lake, crystal clear water, palm trees. People sitting in lawn chairs eating lunch. This is Huacachina. 100 permanent residents living inside the largest sand dunes in the Western Hemisphere. The dunes aren't decorative, they're active, they move. Every year they inch closer to the town, and the town doesn't move because where exactly would you go? The legend says the lake was created when an Incan princess dropped her mirror while fleeing a hunter. The mirror shattered, became the water. The folds of her dress became the dunes. She never escaped. She became a mermaid who drowns lone men on dark nights, which, honestly, is a solid origin story. The real history is almost as wild. In the 1940s, this was Peru's version of the Hamptons. Wealthy families drove out specifically to bathe in the sulfur-rich water, believed to cure arthritis and joint disease. Today you can sit at a restaurant with decent Wi-Fi and a cold beer while the window next to you frames a landscape that looks like it was borrowed from a different planet. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. The Oasis is dying. Decades of industrial farming in the surrounding region have been draining the underground water table since the 1980s. The lake you see in every travel photo? It's fake. Local authorities pump water in artificially around the clock just to maintain the appearance of a natural oasis. Without those pumps running 24/7, the sand wins, completely. In years, not decades. The tourists who fly in don't know any of this. They're here for sandboarding, strapping a board to their feet and launching off a 300-foot dune at 40 miles an hour. A paradise on life support. Welcome to number 13. Number 12. Setenil de las Bodegas, Spain. If your apartment has low ceilings and you hate it, wait. Setenil de las Bodegas in southern Spain is a town where the ceiling is a cliff, not metaphorically. The buildings here don't have roofs in the traditional sense. They have a basalt rock face that the Trejo River carved out over millions of years, and the townspeople just moved in underneath it. Think about that engineering decision. Ancient builders looked at a giant overhanging boulder the size of an aircraft hangar and said, "That's the back wall. That's the roof. We're done. Let's add a door." Walk down the main street and you're sitting at a cafe table with a rock formation directly above your head that weighs conservatively in the millions of pounds. Every human instinct you have tells you to get out from under it. Your palms sweat, your neck tightens. You look up and your brain starts running calculations it's not equipped to run. And then you notice the family at the next table who've clearly been coming here for 30 years and are completely unbothered. The name comes from Setenil, Latin for 7 times nothing. During the Reconquista, Spanish Catholic armies tried to take this fortress from the Moorish defenders 7 consecutive times. Failed every single time. The overhanging rock made it physically impossible to assault from above. It finally fell in 1484 on the 8th attempt. For the 3,000 people living here today, the cliff is an asset, not a threat. The basalt acts as a natural climate system. Southern Spain regularly hits 110 degrees Fahrenheit in summer. These homes stay in the low 70s with zero air conditioning. In winter, the rock retains heat like a cast iron skillet. Their energy bills are basically nothing. Inside, flat-screen TVs, fiber internet, dishwashers, full modern kitchens. Just with a several million-pound rock for a ceiling. Number 11. Rocamadour, France. Quick break. Drop a comment right now. We're not even halfway through the list. Which one so far would break you first, number 13 or number 12? Okay, number 11. Rocamadour in southwestern France isn't built on a cliff. It's built into one, stacked vertically up the face of a limestone canyon, 400 feet above the river below. Houses, churches, chapels, a castle, all clinging to a sheer vertical wall like a city-sized version of something a 10-year-old glues together and calls a school project. In the Middle Ages, this was one of the 4 most important Christian pilgrimage destinations on Earth. Jerusalem, Rome, Santiago de Compostela. And this cliff in rural France, kings made the trip, so did barefoot peasants. The draw was a small black wooden statue of the Virgin Mary, the Black Madonna, said to perform miracles, and the remains of a hermit saint whose body was allegedly found here completely undecayed after centuries in the rock. The social structure of the entire medieval world was literally baked into the architecture. Bottom of the cliff, merchants and craftsmen living in the dampest, darkest section, middle tier. The churches, the clergy, the sanctuaries, top, the knight's fortress, controlling everything from above. To reach the sanctuaries for forgiveness, pilgrims had to climb 216 steps, on their knees, praying on every single step, until the stone wore through their skin. Above the chapel entrance, chained to the rock wall, still visible today, is a rusted iron sword. According to legend, it belonged to Roland, the greatest warrior hero in French epic poetry, who threw it skyward with his last breath so enemies couldn't claim it. It flew hundreds of miles and embedded itself here. Is it actually Roland's sword? Almost certainly not. Does it matter? Stand underneath it and tell me it doesn't feel like it could be. The question that doesn't leave you. These people had no cranes, no steel, no concrete. They raised thousands of tons of stone up a 400-foot vertical cliff face, and it's still there 9 centuries later. What exactly are we doing with our infrastructure budgets? Number 10. Kandovan, Iran. Number 10 looks like a Middle-earth location scouting department got lost in northwestern Iran and just gave up. Kandovan is a village built entirely inside volcanic rock cones. The cones were formed when the Sahan volcano erupted thousands of years ago. Lava and ash hardened, then wind and rain spent millennia sculpting them into these bizarre pointed towers, some 130 feet tall. From a distance, it looks like a hillside of giant termite mounds. Up close, it looks like the kind of thing that gets greenlit as a fantasy film set. Except families have been living inside these cones for 700 years. Here's why it started. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century were sweeping through the region, the kind of military force you do not negotiate with and cannot fight. Local villagers made the only rational decision available. They grabbed whatever tools they had and disappeared into the mountains. Then they started digging into the soft volcanic rock, cone by cone, room by room. The layouts they developed aren't primitive, they're engineered, ground floor, livestock. The animal's body heat rises naturally through the structure, a biological heating system that works without electricity, invented 700 years before the thermostat. Second and third floors, living spaces, top floor, food storage where cooler temperatures preserve supplies through winter. Walls up to 6 feet thick, create natural insulation that modern building codes spend entire chapters trying to replicate artificially. Warm in winter, cool in summer. No utility bill required. Today, around 700 people still live here permanently. There's a school, a mosque, a functioning local economy, and a 5-star hotel carved directly into the rock, with heated floors, room service, and a minibar. The Mongols who forced these people into the mountains are gone. Kandovan is still here. That's the kind of long game worth playing. Number 9. Ganvie, Benin. Pause for a second. We're halfway through the list. The discomfort should be setting in. Number 9 is what happens when an entire people decides the only way to survive is to make themselves completely unreachable. Ganvie is a floating city on Lake Nokue in Benin, West Africa, between 20,000 and 30,000 people. No roads, no sidewalks, no cars, no bikes. Every single trip, school, market, clinic, church, made by dugout canoe. Kids navigate these waterways the way American kids navigate parking lots, automatically without thinking from an early age. This city didn't come from inspiration or innovation, it came from desperation. In the 15th or 16th century, the Tofanu people were being systematically hunted. The Fon warriors of the neighboring Dahomey kingdom were capturing them and selling them to European, specifically Portuguese, slave traders. The Fon were militarily superior in every way. Except one. Their religion forbade warriors from entering water. Stepping into a lake was considered spiritual contamination. It would strip them of their power and their connection to their gods. The Tofanu knew this. So they built their entire civilization in the one place the Fon warriors couldn't follow. Bamboo stilts, miles from shore. Every home, every community structure, every piece of their lives, suspended over water, their enemies refused to touch. The name Ganvie translates roughly as "we survived." Today, it's a fully functioning city, schools, clinics, a floating market where women trade fish and produce from canoes in the early morning. Children here learn to paddle before they learn to read. Solid ground is something most residents experience only occasionally and find slightly disorienting when they do. The dark side, the lake that saved their ancestors, is slowly being poisoned by the city living on top of it. No sewage infrastructure, no water treatment. The government keeps offering to relocate everyone to the mainland. The residents keep saying no. Some things you don't abandon, even when they start to hurt you. Number 8. Al-Hajjarah, Yemen. Number 8 looks like a fairy tale. It was built to be a fortress. Al-Hajjarah sits on the peak of a sharp mountain ridge in Yemen's Haraz Mountains, at an altitude where clouds routinely drift below the windows. The multi-story stone buildings merge so completely with the cliff face beneath them that you genuinely cannot tell where the mountain ends and the construction begins. It looks grown, not built. Founded in the 10th century by the Sulihid dynasty for one explicit purpose, to be impossible to capture, the city's single entrance requires a steep, exposed climb completely visible to defenders above. The buildings are cut from local stone without mortar, then decorated with intricate white geometric patterns in gypsum. A military fortification that somehow looks like an elaborate wedding cake. Beneath the city, massive underground cisterns carved into the rock to collect rainwater, grain stores capable of sustaining the entire population through sieges lasting years. This wasn't a town with a wall around it. This was a self-contained survival machine disguised as a city. Today, electricity has arrived, phones exist, but the basic rhythm hasn't changed. The isolation, the silence, the sense that the urgency of the modern world simply cannot climb this particular mountain. When clouds drift beneath your feet on a regular Wednesday morning, your priorities rearrange themselves. Number 7. Castellfollit de la Roca, Spain. Let me ask you something before we hit number 7. You've seen 6 locations. Which one would get you to pack up and leave first? Genuinely, drop it in the comments. I'll respond to every answer in the first hour. Number 7. Triggers something primal in almost everyone who sees it. Castellfollit de la Roca in Catalonia, Spain, is not built on a hill, it's built on a blade, a narrow basalt promontory, less than half a mile long, with sheer 160-foot drops on both sides, simultaneously. 2 rivers run at the bottom. The entire village of roughly 1,000 people sits on this volcanic knife edge and has since the Middle Ages. The geology is extraordinary. This cliff formed from 2 separate lava flows from 2 completely different volcanic eruptions, 200,000 years apart. Look at the cliff face, and you can see the layers like a geological record of 2 disasters that somehow created one spectacular platform. The streets are medieval, so narrow that 2 people walking in opposite directions have to turn sideways to pass. Sunlight only hits the cobblestones directly at noon. But the real gut punch is the back of the buildings. There are no backyards here, no fences, no buffer zones. The rear walls of these homes stand at the literal edge of a 160-foot vertical drop, built from the same dark volcanic rock as the cliff, so seamlessly that from below, the buildings look like they grew directly out of the stone. Open a kitchen window and you're not looking at a neighbor's yard. You're looking at 2 rivers, 160 feet straight down. If a coffee mug falls off your windowsill, it falls 160 feet before it hits anything. The church at the tip of the promontory, the Church of San Salvador, built in the 10th century, burned down during the Spanish Civil War and stood in ruins for decades. The townspeople rebuilt it themselves, stone by stone. Because when your whole town is already at the edge of a cliff, you don't retreat. The local basalt quarry was a major industry until someone in the 20th century finally calculated that the quarrying was actively undermining the foundation of the cliff the entire town was sitting on. They stopped, eventually barely in time. Number 6. Shibam, Yemen. Number 6 gets called the Manhattan of the desert, and for once, that's not marketing, it's geography. Shibam, in Yemen's Hadramaut Valley, is the oldest skyscraper city in the world. Around 500 tower buildings, some hitting 100 feet tall, the height of a 10-story American apartment building, rising straight out of the desert floor. Not steel, not concrete, not glass. Mud. Sun-dried mud bricks, mixed with straw and water. Most of these towers were built in the 16th century. The settlement itself is nearly 2,000 years old. The reason they built up instead of out was a 1532 flood that wiped the entire original city off the map. When you're living in a dry riverbed that floods catastrophically every few decades, you have 2 options: leave or build higher than the water can reach. The people of Shibam chose to build higher. And then they kept going, because dense vertical construction also made the whole city into a single unified defensive fortress against Bedouin raids. The engineering required to make mud buildings this tall is genuinely impressive. Walls at the base are nearly 6 feet thick, tapering as they rise. Doors and windows use rare termite-resistant hardwoods, because in a mud building, termites are an existential problem. The facades have to be replastered with fresh mud and lime every few years, a maintenance cycle that never ends and requires the whole community to participate. Social hierarchy was literally vertical: bottom floors, grain and livestock; middle floors, men and guests; top floors, closest to the breeze, the women's quarters. Shibam is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. People still live in these towers today. They're maintaining active skyscrapers made of dirt. If that's not a flex, I don't know what is. Number 5. Monsanto, Portugal. Number 5 answers a question nobody thought to ask. What if the boulders were the building? Monsanto, in southeastern Portugal, sits in the middle of a field of enormous granite boulders, some weighing over 200 tons. The settlers who arrived here centuries ago didn't have the equipment to move them, didn't have the explosives to break them, so they did something that sounds insane until you see it work. They built inside them. A 200-ton boulder becomes someone's bedroom ceiling. Another replaces a load-bearing wall. A third sits directly in the middle of an alley, and everyone, residents, visitors, and the donkeys that are still actively used for local transport, politely goes around it. Nobody decided this was quirky. It was just the only available option, and over generations it became identity. At the 750-foot summit, ruins of a Templar castle that Romans, Visigoths, and Arabs each fought over in different centuries. For the same strategic reason, you can see everything from here, and nothing can sneak up on you. In 1938, the Salazar dictatorship ran a national competition for most authentically Portuguese village. Monsanto won. The prize was a silver rooster, still sitting on the clock tower. The competition has never been held again because the committee presumably realized no other village could ever win. Living here requires one specific personality trait: total faith in the geological stability of granite boulders balanced on a steep hillside directly above your bedroom. Those boulders haven't moved in centuries. Number 4. Monemvasia, Greece. 4 spots left. The discomfort should be real by now. Number 4. Invented stealth architecture, before stealth was a concept. Monemvasia, on the eastern coast of the Greek Peloponnese, is a fortress city on a small rocky island connected to the mainland by a single 650-foot causeway, one way in, one way out. The name means exactly that in Greek, single entrance. From the sea, the city is completely invisible. The entire residential area faces the open ocean. A sheer cliff face, several hundred feet tall, blocks any view from the shore. Byzantine military architects essentially built a city that doesn't exist from the outside. Founded in the 6th century AD by people fleeing Slavic and Avar invasions, it became one of the most important trading ports in the Mediterranean by the 13th century, 40,000 people, producing a sweet wine so famous that Venetian merchants named their own wine after it. That name, Malvasia, eventually became Malmsey in English, which is the wine that Richard, Duke of Clarence, was allegedly drowned in during the Wars of the Roses. So the next time you order a Malmsey, you're ordering something with a genuinely bizarre paper trail. Today, no cars, not by ordnance, by physics. The medieval lanes are simply too narrow. The same iron-reinforced gates that held off Ottoman janissaries and Barbarossa's pirates are the gates you walk through to enter. Byzantine churches with faded frescoes, Venetian mansions with carved stone crests. Time doesn't stop here, it just moves slower than anywhere else you've ever been. Number 3. Yanjiang, China. 3 left. And this is where we start leaving unusual behind and enter what would FEMA actually do here. Yanjiang in China's Yunnan province holds the official title of the world's narrowest city. Looking at it, you immediately understand why nobody else is competing for that record. The entire city is compressed into a gorge between the Yangtze River and vertical karst mountains that rise directly from the water's edge. At its widest, 1,000 feet across. At its narrowest bottleneck, 100 feet between the cliff wall and the river. In that 100 feet, apartment buildings, schools, restaurants, hospitals, shops, one main road, a handful of bridges. That's it. That's the entire city infrastructure for 400,000 people. The buildings extend over the water on thin concrete stilts, not as a design choice, but because the river floods regularly and the stilts are the only reason those apartments exist in the spring. No stilts, no floor. It's that simple. There are no parks, no open plazas, no space wide enough for a child to run more than a few steps without hitting a railing above a drop. There is no viable large-scale evacuation route if the karst walls above decide to shed weight, which they do in small quantities every rainy season. The small quantities being multi-ton rockfalls. This gorge was historically a salt trading route. The original settlements were rest stops. Those rest stops are now a city of 400,000 people with no meaningful exit and a flooding problem that never fully goes away. Yanjiang is one of the most impressive feats of human adaptation in history. It's also the kind of place that, if it were in the United States, would have 17 federal agencies fighting over who has to write the environmental impact report. Number 2. Santa Cruz del Islote, Colombia. Number 2 is going to break your brain in a different way than the rest of this list. Santa Cruz del Islote is a small artificial island off the Caribbean coast of Colombia. Total land area, roughly 2.5 acres. That's about 2 soccer fields. Population, approximately 1,200 people. For reference, that gives it a population density roughly 4 times higher than Manhattan. From above, it looks like a solid mosaic of corrugated tin and concrete floating on turquoise water. There is not a single square foot of undeveloped land. Every inch is a house, a footpath, a dock, or someone's laundry line. Fresh water comes by tanker from the mainland and is strictly rationed. There is no sewage system, there is no grocery store, food comes by boat. There is no cemetery, the dead are taken by boat to be buried on an uninhabited neighboring island. There is also no police force, because there's no crime. In a space where everyone can see everything, where privacy is a concept that simply doesn't exist, where the population density makes Times Square on New Year's Eve look spacious, the crime rate is effectively zero. Everyone knows everyone. Disputes get handled before they escalate. Doors are never locked. There's nothing to steal that the thief doesn't already have. The settlement started 150 years ago when fishermen noticed this particular outcrop had no mosquitoes, unlike every surrounding island. That was the entire deciding factor. No mosquitoes. They stayed the night, then brought their families, then slowly expanded the island by packing coral rubble around the edges. Kids here learn to swim before they can read. Soccer gets played on a concrete slab at low tide, the only open flat surface that exists. Almost nobody wants to leave. This might be the densest inhabited place on Earth. It might also be the most genuinely cohesive community on Earth. That's probably not a coincidence. Number 1. Rinconada, Peru. And then there's number 1, and I need you to actually sit with this one. Rinconada, Peru, 16,700 feet above sea level. Let me put that in terms that land. Denali, the highest mountain in North America, peaks at 20,310 feet. Rinconada sits at 16,700. You're not at the top of a mountain. You're 2/3 of the way up the highest peak on the continent, and you live there permanently, year-round. The air at 16,700 feet contains roughly half the oxygen available at sea level. An average American stepping outside would struggle to walk across a parking lot without stopping. Headaches start within hours. Altitude sickness kicks in within a day. Pulmonary edema, fluid in the lungs, is a real and common risk for unacclimatized visitors. Temperatures stay below freezing for most of the year, every year. 50,000 people call this home. Not researchers, not military personnel on rotation, families, children, 50,000 people who wake up every morning at 16,700 feet, have breakfast, and go to work. The work is gold mining. There is a glacier here called Sleeping Beauty. Under that glacier, enormous gold deposits, and that fact, that single geological fact, is the reason 50,000 people have built a city in a place the human body was not designed to survive. The conditions in Rinconada are not difficult. Difficult is a word that applies to your commute or your open-plan office. What exists in Rinconada is something different. There is no sewage system. Waste goes into the streets or gets packed into snow where it doesn't decompose because nothing decomposes at that temperature, it just accumulates. The soil is saturated with mercury used in artisanal gold processing at levels that would trigger federal Superfund designation in the United States 10 times over. The water is contaminated. The air smells of chemicals and accumulated waste and ice. There are no functioning courts, no reliable law enforcement. The operational law of La Rinconada is whoever is physically strongest wins. And then there's the mining system. It's called cacoreo. For 30 consecutive days, miners work without a single dollar in wages. Every ounce of ore they process goes to the mine owner. On the 31st day, 1 day per month, they're permitted to take home however much ore they can physically carry on their own body, however much they can lift and haul and walk out with. Some men walk out with enough ore to make a month's worth of wages in a single carry. Most walk out with almost nothing. Either way, they're back the next morning for day 1 of the next cycle. La Rinconada is what happens when hope and desperation occupy the same body at the same altitude. It is the rawest, most concentrated version of the same force that built every American gold rush city. Sacramento, Denver, Deadwood, except those cities had the option to grow into something else. La Rinconada, at 16,700 feet, has nowhere to grow. It can only get more intense. It's the #1 most extreme place humans live on Earth. And by any honest accounting, it probably shouldn't exist at all. 13 places, 13 different answers to the same question. What will people endure to have somewhere to call home? They'll live under boulders. They'll build cities on stilts over lakes their enemies refuse to enter. They'll stack mud 10 stories high and replaster it every year. They'll balance a village on a volcanic blade 160 feet above a river. They'll climb to 16,700 feet and breathe half the available oxygen and mine gold in a system designed to keep them just hopeful enough to come back tomorrow. And then they'll complain about their neighbors. Which of these 13 would you last longest in? Not which looks coolest, which would you actually survive? Drop your answer below. If this hit different than you expected, the like button is right there. And subscribe, because there are places on this list that didn't make the cut and they're somehow worse.